Hey guys, welcome back to the studio. This week I've got a quick one for you. I'm going to teach you guys 5 killer patterns that you can use over a back-cycling chord progression. This chord progression is super important for us to be able to play over since it pops up so much in so many different tunes. These patterns are really fun to play and they've got some really killer tensions and resolutions in them for you to pick apart and use in your own improvisations. As always, I'll play each one for you and then we'll do a quick analysis of the pattern before moving on to the next one. You guys ready? Let's get started. Before we get into playing the patterns, I figure I'd offer up a brief explanation of the chord cycle that they work over. In a lot of standards, there's a progression that goes like this. It happens on Night and Day, on Stella By Starlight, I Love You, and countless others. There isn't really a name for it, but I've taken to calling it the back-cycling progression because that's what it does. It cycles back to the home key with a series of these 2-5 moves. In the key of C, you might think that the C major and F sharp half diminished are entirely unrelated, but they're actually not. One of the most mind-blowing things that I learned from studying Barry Harris's method and the videos of his masterclasses is that every half diminished chord comes from a major. What he meant by this is that if we take a major key, in this case C, and then go to the relative minor, in this case that's A, and we put the natural 6 of that relative in the bass, we get the half diminished. Once we've got that, we can cycle back to the home key using this chord progression. Recently, I spent a lot of time coming up with ways that I can move through this cycle more like a pianist by using the most minimal amount of movement possible from chord to chord. To do that, there's gonna be some funny fingerings for a lot of chords that you might be used to. Here, take a look at what I mean. Now that we've got a grip on the chord progression, let's take a look at the first pattern. In this first pattern, I started out by using some chromaticism from the C major scale to cover the first 2 changes. That let me start out on the 7th of the F sharp half diminished and walk up chromatically to the flat 13 of the B7. From there, I played up the triad, giving me the root, the sharp 9, and the flat 9 that then resolved into the 5th of the next chord. At the start of the E minor 7, I come down with 2 half steps to the 7th of A7 and then played down the diminished chord to then pivot to the 3rd of the D minor. Then I went up chromatically into the sharp 9th of the G. Here I use this cell from the G altered scale to land on the 5th of the C and end the phrase. Here it is again one more time, a little under tempo. Let's check out the next pattern, up to tempo now. In this pattern, I ignored the half diminished chord altogether. I started out on the flat 9th of the B7 and played up the chord, giving me this C diminished arpeggio. That resolves down to the flat 13, and then I used 2 half steps from the Barry Harris chromatic scale to get down to the root of the next chord. From there, I played down the arpeggio, then used this little enclosure cell to get me to the flat 3rd of the D minor. Then I played more Barry Harris chromatics and used 2 half steps down to the 5th of G, where I played the diminished down to resolve into the 3rd of a C and end the phrase. Take another look at that one, slowed down. Check out pattern 3 at full speed next. For For pattern 3, I decided to start on an upbeat so I could play this triplet lick off the root of the half diminished and resolve it into the third of the B7. From there, I came down chromatically to the fifth of the E minor and played down a C half diminished arpeggio, giving me the sound of an A9. Then I pivoted up to the root and used it as a chromatic approach to the diminished triad off the flat ninth of A. That pulled up into the third of D minor, and from there I was thinking G altered, which is really just A flat melodic minor. This gave me some really cool tensions and let me resolve into the fifth of C super cleanly to end the phrase. Here's how that one sounds slowed down. Pattern 4 is up next, and it too uses some pretty juicy altered scale ideas at the end. Check it out up to tempo first. In this pattern, I started out on the flat 5 of the half diminished and just came down the arpeggio so I could resolve with the third of B7 on beat 3. Then I used a chromatic approach into the diminished triad off the fifth of the chord this time. That let me resolve down into the fifth of E minor on the next downbeat. I was thinking all dominant here though, so I came down to the root with one half step and then used a chromatic approach into the third of the A and then played up the diminished from there. That resolves down to the fifth of D and I came down to the flat seventh of G with two half steps. Here, I used another idea from the altered scale by playing this out as kind of an A flat minor 6 cell that resolves up into the third of C. Take another look at pattern 4, under tempo. Finally, let's check out what pattern 5 sounds like up to tempo. For this last pattern, I started out by just playing up the chord off the third of the half diminished, which let me pivot into the fifth of B7. Then I came down with two half steps to get to the seventh of E minor. Again, I'm just concerned with the dominant chord, so I decided to treat this like the fourth, and I know I can play this phrase that Barry Harris calls 4. It's really just an enclosure of the third, but since I'm playing it on the downbeat, I decided to leave a little rest here so the phrase can continue smoothly. Off the and of 3, I played up the diminished from the fifth of A, and then down this D minor 7 arpeggio. That pulled down really smooth to the third of the G, and then I played this enclosure off the flat 9 to get me to the fifth of C and end the phrase. Here's one more look at pattern 5, a little slower. Thanks for tuning into the studio and checking out these patterns. I love exercises like this. I find it super helpful to slow down my thought process and really nail down the sound that I want. That way, I can take an idea through its paces and eventually it's going to start showing up in my playing more naturally. Let me know down in the comments if you guys found these patterns helpful. I know I used to find playing over lots of continuous chord changes like this pretty challenging, but the more that I studied phrasing by the jazz masters and different chromatic concepts, it became a lot easier to do. As always, make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that bell for notifications too. Like with every video here at the studio, you can find the written material for today's lesson over at my Patreon page for as little as $10 a month. A huge thanks goes out to my incredible patrons: PH, Josh, David Zuckerbraun, David Nickel, Max Irwin, Everton Armstrong, Jay Jarek, Bill Jacob, Stephen Schwartz, and jazz luminaire patron Bebop. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the studio. And a big thank you to all of you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.